Hey everyone, welcome or welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Lauren, and today I am going to be doing a book unhaul. So I recently realized that the last time I did an unhaul was in March of 2023, nearly an entire year ago. The day that this video publishes will be officially the first day of spring, which means time for some spring cleaning, so out with the old and in with the new. Now I have a few categories here, although I will say that the bulk of these books are just books that I thought were okay and am never gonna read again. But that being said, I will section this off into chapters so you can skip around if you want to hear about, things that you're more interested in. I think that's about it, so let's just jump right in and unhaul some books. So first up, the most boring category, I think, books that were accidentally sent to me. I just have a couple of books in this category. The first one is the Meet Cute Project. Book Outlet accidentally sent me this book, and if you've been watching my channel for any amount of time at all, you'll know just by the look of this is not something that I will ever read, so I'm going to get rid of it. And then we also have Nyxia Uprising, which I like the Nyxia series, and I did order this book, but they sent me two. I don't need two, so I'm gonna let this one go. And speaking of not needing two, I have a couple more books here that I have duplicates of. The first one is Allegiant. I started collecting the anniversary editions here, and they are beautiful and I love them, and there is no reason for me to hang on to this one, so I'm gonna let this one go. And then also Relics. I read and liked this book, and I'm obviously hanging on to one copy because I really liked it. I think I ordered a copy of this from Book Outlet, and then in the Strand book box that they sent at some point, this was in the box, so don't need two copies of it. Next up, we have books that I have been hanging on to for a while, but I just need to quit lying to myself. I'm never going to read them. Get them off of my shelves and into the hands of people that will hopefully love them. The first of those is Metrophage. The description of this book definitely sounds like something that is like up my alley. It's like a sci-fi. I think it might even be kind of cyberpunk-ish, but trying to read through the first chapter of this, I don't know, I guess it's just maybe the writing style. I was like not really into it, and pretty sure I'm not ever going to reach for this book. Next is The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock. This came in a Book of the Month box whenever I still had my subscription, which was in September of 2018. I did pick this up at one point and read a couple of chapters, but it just didn't hook me. And I'm probably not going to pick it up again. Next, we have Love Star. This is actually a translated novel. It seems to have a fairly dense writing style, and reading through the synopsis again, it just doesn't really, I'm not really interested in it anymore. And lastly, we have The White Plague. I really just picked this up because it is a Frank Herbert novel, and I love Dune. He wrote Dune, but I'm not interested in the synopsis of this book, and I've been lying to myself saying that I will read it, but I've had it for such a long time and I'm not going to read it. So hopefully it will find its way into the hands of a huge Frank Herbert fan. All right, next we have books that I am just never going to read again. Some of them I liked, some of them I thought were okay, some of them not a big fan of. Most importantly, they didn't really leave any kind of impression on me. Therefore, I will likely never want to read them again. I've roughly divided these up by genre, the first of which books that I would call horror. The first one is Synth. This is a short story collection. I can't remember if I read all of the stories in here or not. I think I did. But they just were kind of out there, not particularly intriguing to me. So I'm not going to pick this up again. Next, we have Ghost City Girl. This is actually an independently published novel, and I liked it okay. It's like a cyberpunk sort of thing, like a cyberpunk horror, I guess. It was pretty fun, but the writing just had a few issues, and I was never really fully invested in this book, so I'm never going to read it again. Next, we have a book that I didn't like. Of all these books, the book that I liked the least was Ungodly. I really wanted to like this book conceptually. It seems like something that I should like, but I just really did not like the way this author wrote women. Didn't work for me. And lastly, we have The Hollow Kind. This I finished up in January. It was pretty okay. The cover is interesting enough that it kind of makes me want to keep it, but really it's just taking up shelf space, so I think that I'm going to let it go. Next up, we have a few sci-fi novels that I thought were okay, just also not going to read again. The first of which was Firebreak. I did like this book, but it was definitely like a one time was enough sort of thing. This was actually like a pretty cool like VR kind of concept. If you like VR stories, you may really like this one, but I'm never going to pick it up again. Next, I think I'm going to be letting go of Upgrade, which is pretty unfortunate because I am a Blake Crouch fan, but this just did not work for me. For many reasons. I wanted it to so badly, but this was kind of a bust for me. I'm a fan of his, but I don't love his books that much. So much so that I would just collect them for the sake of collecting them. And lastly, we have Dead Space by Kaylee Wallace. I did really like this book, but it's just very unlikely that I would read this again, I think, because this book had a sort of like murder mystery thing going on. And honestly, once I know who did it, I am very, very unlikely to pick up a book again. Next, we have a few books that are fantasy books that I'm not going to read again. The first of which is A Deadly Education. I could not get into this. It was a slog for me the whole way through. For some reason, I didn't really get this book. Maybe I took too long to read it. Like I read it over little bits over a very long period of time. And maybe that was what kept me from getting fully invested in it. But like, I don't know that I fully understood this book. Next, I've got a couple books in the, the Wayward Children series, In an Absent Dream and Down Among the Sticks and Bones. These books, I think, both have incredibly beautiful covers, and I would honestly definitely keep these for the covers, except for I have a limited amount of shelf space, and I was not really into these books. The writing style was beautiful, but like the story arcs just never quite hooked me. Last but not least, we have Erase the Sands. This, I think, is a young adult fantasy, and this is a good book. I would definitely recommend it to anyone who likes young adult fantasy, but it's as pure and simple as the fact that I am just not gonna read it again. All right, next I have some books that I would call like sort of literary with some magical realism elements to them, I guess. The first one is The Cartographers. This one is kind of hard to let go of because I absolutely love this cover. I think this is such a fantastic, beautifully designed cover. And this story for me, it had parts in it that I thought were really excellent, but overall, this was a very middle of the road book. One that I just quickly started forgetting the moment I finished it. So this is a really nice hardback and a beautiful book, so I think it should just go to someone who might really appreciate it. Next, I've got a little vast paperback, Legion by Brandon Sanderson. This is kind of a like an adventure story with some like what I would call magical realism elements to it. And this was a fun book, but this subgenre, I guess, in my opinion, this is not Brandon Sanderson's sweet spot. Honestly, this could have been written by anybody. It didn't particularly feel like a Brandon Sanderson novel, though I had fun. I'm not going to read it again. Speaking of books I absolutely did not understand, next is Vita Nostra. I don't get this book, and I'm not embarrassed to say it. I didn't understand it. For me, this book was just kind of nonsensical. I get the sense that there is some sort of something I needed to know in order to be able to understand this. I think for some people who get it, they get it, but for me, I did not. Also a really beautiful book that I'm kind of sad to let go of, but like, this book, when I see it on my shelf, it kind of reminds me of how dumb it made me feel. So I think that I'm just going to go on ahead and pass it along to the next person. Next is The Woodwife. This is I would say like an Native American inspired magical realism literary novel. This is actually a very good novel, very well written, very lovely, but I'm not going to read it again, and I think that because it is so good, I would really rather prefer it get into the hands of someone who would read it and enjoy it, rather than just letting it sit and collect dust on my shelves. Next is Just Like Home. This actually, I guess, could be considered kind of a horror novel, although it had like some horror elements. By and large, for me, this was very like thematically heavy and rich, and I think that it was really trying to say something about some really sensitive topics, and I think it succeeded in doing that, but those themes were not particularly relatable for me. It's still a well-written book, very cool looking book, but not one that I would imagine myself reaching for again anytime soon. Next, we have The Back of the Turtle. This is a very beautiful novel, and it is a literary award winner, Canadian Council for the Arts, and it is very beautifully written and a very touching story. This is also kind of like a folklore-inspired story, and though I did enjoy it at the time, it's not something I'm going to find myself reaching for again, something that I would like to get into the hands of a person who might really, really enjoy it. Last but not least, Comfort Me with Apples. This is kind of allegorical, I guess, and a nicely told story, really interesting. However, what I will say is that this book kind of has like a reveal, I guess, in the end of it. And once you know it, you know it. And so because of that, very unlikely that I will ever pick it up again. All right, and lastly, I have a few books that are pretty purely what I would say literary fiction books that I'm just not going to read again. The first of them is The Great Alone. This is a very emotionally charged story. Check the trigger warnings. This book, I think, could be pretty disturbing to you if you've had certain experiences in your life. I enjoyed this, but I think because it had sort of that emotional heaviness to it, like it was a tough read, and because of that, I don't think I'm going to volunteer to read this again anytime soon. Next, we have The Ghosts of Heaven. This was actually a pretty interesting story. It was told in like multiple parts across like hundreds of years and made it very interesting. But ultimately, I thought it was pretty okay. Yeah, it was okay. I'm not going to read it again, so time to let go of it. Next, we have Death in Her Hands. This is a story of like an older woman who is kind of losing it a little bit. And I thought this book was incredibly well conceived and very well written. However, I thought that this book was a huge bummer. It made me incredibly sad, and I read for escapism. I read for the pleasure and the joy of it, and this book was just like too depressing for me. And lastly, we have The Last House on Needless Street. I did like this book. Actually, this is kind of a funny story. I opened this book and I went to see what the page count was and landed on one of the pages in the book, in the back of the book, and there was one word on a page in the back of the book that my eyes accidentally like looked in that spot and saw that word, and it ruined the twist of this book. I'm not going to say it because it might ruin it for you. If you're curious, you can ask me down below and I'll let you know what it is. But I saw that and I was like, oh my gosh, I bet that this story is about this thing. And so that colored my entire perception of this book reading it, because I knew exactly what was going to happen. If that had not have happened, I would have had a much more pleasurable time reading this. But yeah, it just kind of ruined it for me. And because of that, this book was like a kind of meh reading experience. All right, so I think that is it. Those are all of the books that I am going to be unhauling. My first unhaul of the year. I would be curious to know what you thought about any of these. If I'm getting rid of a book that is just your absolute favorite book and you think that I need to hang on to it, or maybe a book that I didn't read that you think I just must give a shot, I would love to talk to you about it in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, I hope that you will like it and possibly subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.